And welcome everyone to the Shitlord-preachers podcast. This is episode 30. I think it's 33?
33.
Actually, I think it's supposed to be 34. But welcome everyone to the Shitlord-preachers podcast. My name is Amos Joseph. I'm joined by my co-host, Brook Potter, who is in the UK. Myself here in Minnesota. The Shitlord-preachers podcast, for those of you joining us for the first time, we're basically the, we both were former preachers now. As I say, reformed shitlords, and we have these discussions. And Brook and I have been friends for a few years. We've had a lot of discussions regarding. Back then, it used to be about like theology and ministry, but now, as we started moving towards, the climate that we're in today, we've started having conversations about politics, social issues, as well as cultural issues, and we decided to create the Shitlord Preachers podcast. So, welcome everyone. How's it going today, Brook?
It's going well, Amos. So this is number 34, I think. I'm surprised that we've made it as long as this without being, raided by the FBI, taken down by the NSA, and, censored by every blue-haired feminist in like 1,000 miles. So if we're still at it, I'll take that as a good sign. I'm doing well, man. It's getting pretty cold out here in the UK. We're looking forward to our first batch of snow pretty soon. I know we're behind you guys in the US in that regard, Minnesota. And but yeah, it's been really good. I'm looking forward to today's stream.
Yeah, the snow here, we got a good 9 inches the last couple days. I think I sent you some pictures. I had to check out. I had to drive through some storms the past couple days, and that was not fun.
Like zero visibility,
no, like a tenth of a mile visibility. But it's bad when it's the right temperature where the snow will stick to your windshield wipers. Right. So your windshield wipers stop being effective after about 20 minutes, because even though you're wiping, the snow attaches to it, turns into giant icicles, which impede it from keeping your windshield clear. So you have to pull over every 20-25 minutes to clear your windshield. Make sure it's, clear the ice so that the windshield wipers can work a little bit longer. So definitely
changed those windshield wipers when last I was there.
Oh, for the viewers, Brook came down here for my birthday last year.
Yeah, the 25th birthday.
My 25th birthday. He came down here, and we were driving, and as we were driving, the wipers broke, and Brook just went ahead and bought me a brand new pair. So there's a nice little video. Yeah.
The blades, yeah.
There's a nice little video of Brook freaking out at my windshield, the blades.
Yeah, make it stop. What the fuck is that? And yeah, I was losing my shit on the state of the blades.
But we wanted to talk about a couple things before we get into the main topic we wanted to touch on today. Now, Brook, what's going on with this Brexit you're telling me about?
Oh my God. Not much at the moment. Now, for anybody who doesn't know, I think it was 2 years ago, 2016, there was a public referendum posed to the British people whether they wanted to stay within the European Union. Now, that's not the same thing as being part of Europe. It's the European Union is a political body that's trying to be the United States of Europe. So they're trying to consolidate power, and they're trying to do all these things. Unlike our American friends who have, they founded a nation and states joined and stuff like that. This is multiple countries with hundreds of years of history coming together with different languages, different cultures, and they're trying to kind of put this hodgepodge together. And it hasn't really worked out very well for many people. So, I mean, I look at the financials of it. If you look at the performance of the EU, it hasn't been great. It really hasn't helped as many countries as they promised. So the UK is in the process of leaving. The Leave vote won 2 years ago, and the then Prime Minister, David Cameron, he was a big Remainer. He wanted to stay within the EU. He stepped down, and we got a new PM, which was this lady called Theresa May, who is our current Prime Minister. She runs with the Conservative Party, which I guess is the equivalent to the Republicans in the US. And, she put forth some very interesting rhetoric in the beginning about how, she wants to do what's best for the country. And, she's going to go to Brussels, which is like the capital of the EU, and make, get everything that we want. We're going to have like the best possible deal with the EU. We're going to have like Canada Plus because Canada has a trade deal with the EU and stuff like that. And anyway, she started off strong. She called an election, which was the biggest blunder in recent political history, where she actually lost seats in the House of Commons, basically because she was so confident they were going to win. She put forth a ridiculous manifesto of ideas, and it blew up in her face. Anyway, skipping forward, we're coming down to the deadline, which I believe is next year, March 29th, 2019, and we are set to leave. Now, before that, for the last 2 years, she's been negotiating whatever we call the withdrawal agreement. And she's come back and she's tried to present to the British people what her plan is. And I actually did a video about this on my personal channel, where I basically said, if you listen to her presentation of this speech, it's filled with doublespeak, Orwellian doublespeak. She talks about how she's delivering a Brexit. She's not delivering Brexit, as if, there are versions of Brexit, in her understanding. And then she added this entirely new idea, which nobody'd ever heard of, which was called the national good, like what's in the country's interest. So she's trying to negotiate a deal, semi-Brexit, but then she's added on this other thing that nobody has asked for, nobody voted for. And as far as everybody knows, the national interest was Brexit. That get us out of this nonsense. And from that negotiation, she's given us basically a vassal deal where the UK remains subject to the EU in a number of facets. I wouldn't go into all of it and bore our listeners, but we lose our parliamentary representation in the European Parliament, so we wouldn't have anybody fighting for our interests, and still maintain a lot of the laws, the regulations, the taxes, the tariffs, and other things, including the European Court of Justice, which is like supposed to be our version of your Supreme Court. It's, they would have jurisdiction over the country, at least for the transition period. And the funny thing about the transition period is that no date is set. It's indefinite. They just said to be determined. And it wasn't even like 2020 and some time. It was like 2000XX. So, I mean, that could go on for like 100 years. And the other part of it was we would not be allowed to leave the union unless both parties agreed, meaning Europe has to agree for us to leave and we have to agree for them. So basically, if Europe wants to keep us in paying, one of the biggest contributions to the EU, I think the third largest contribution, they just don't have to agree for us to leave. And we'd be locked into it, right?
Oh, jeez.
So to make a long story short, Theresa May is in the process of trying to sell this steaming pile of horse manure called her exit agreement or withdrawal agreement to the British people, and nobody's buying this bullshit. On a kind of an aside, she was not a Brexiteer. She was not a believer in leaving the EU. She was actually Remain. But for some reason, the heart of British politics is all about compromise. Like, nobody wants to take a position, so everybody figures that the middle ground is always the right ground. And that's not necessarily true. But she sold it to the Conservative Party, basically saying, well, she's definitely a Remainer at heart, but, she sees this is the vote of the people. She's going to honor the democracy, and she's going to try and please all people. She's going to try and do something in the middle and not be as aggressive as the likes of Boris Johnson and a couple of the others. And that is basically what she's tried to do. She's come back with a deal that basically says, all right, we give up all the power we had in the EU. We give them all the money that they're asking for, and we still obey all their rules nonetheless for an indefinite period, which is not Brexit. So, yeah. It would be like basically saying to any state in the U.S., give up your seats in the Senate, give up your representatives in the what is it called? The not the Parliament. What do you guys have? Legislature, Senate and the legislature, right?
Senate
so give House, up your seats and the House, right? House of Representatives. Give up your House of Representative members. Give up your Senate seats, But you still got to pay your federal taxes. You still got to, follow all the federal laws. But you have basically no say on anything that's being done, right? So taxation without representation, basically. That's what
because that works so well for us.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, as if there wasn't any kind of history that this does not go well.
Yeah, that's wow.
Yeah, it's really messed up. And I'll say this on the aside. Both the UK and the EU are part of the WTO, which is the World Trade Organization. So we do not need any kind of withdrawal agreement from Brussels. We do not need anything. In fact, they don't even need to pass any laws for us to get out of this thing. We got into it by an act of parliament. To get out of it, we just need to rescind the act of parliament, which our present parliament can do, because the only constitution we have in the UK is parliament is sovereign. So they could do what they want. Right? That's the constitution of the UK. They can revoke their agreement into the Lisbon Treaty, and I can't remember what the EU thing was. And that would instantly get us out of this thing. And because both the UK and the EU are part of the World Trade Organizations, as a member, we're not allowed to impose more than about 2% tariffs on each other's products and stuff like that. So we don't need a trade deal, right? We don't need any of this stuff, right? And everything can be dealt with locally. Okay, so we have EU residents that are residing in the UK presently, and vice versa, British residents in Europe at the moment. We rescind the agreement to join the EU. We go to WTO trading terms, and we just pass local legislation saying anybody who's been here from the EU, you're allowed to stay. We give them a visa or whatever the case might be. And if there are any unforeseen issues, we can deal with that as any other sovereign nation would do. Right. That is the biggest myth that's coming out of this thing, is that we need some kind of deal out of the EU. But in fact, if we get no deal, we don't have to give them any money. So I think they want to send 49 or 39 billion pounds across for no reason. And even though we've been contributing like the third largest budget, so we own shares in every building, every project. In fact, they owe us money, right? This looks like, the direction that the country seems to want us to go. So that's kind of where we're at the moment. So it's interesting. I'm hoping something good comes out of this.
Right. Huh. So real quick, actually, it was funny you brought that up, because I just remembered, and I know we didn't touch on this before the stream, but there's an interesting little situation going on in Taiwan regarding a referendum. I don't know if you heard about this.
No, I haven't.
So a while back, I remember, I watched when I did watch some of these like AJ, Al Jazeera Plus videos that on Facebook and such. There was a video that popped up that talked about how Taiwan's Supreme Court ruled gay marriage as basically constitutional, or at least legal, kind of like how we did it here. But being that Taiwan is not exactly like the U.S. government with the structure, so when the court ruled it to be constitutional, it wasn't received as, well, law from the bench, like it was here.
Right.
So what had happened was, and someone, because I was talking to an old family friend from there, who's an American, so he didn't vote in this, but he said, yeah, so they did that, but the people were like, hold on, just because the Supreme Court says it's okay doesn't mean we're okay with this.
Right.
So a referendum came down, 80% turnout.
Wow.
That is unheard of across any country.
Wow.
80% turnout. 2/3 majority voting against the legalization of gay marriage.
2/3, you said?
Against, yes.
Wow.
So now they're trying to figure out what to do.
What? I'm not familiar with the political system in Taiwan.
I'm not as familiar as I used to be either. I mean, there is a parliament with a president,
right, which is,
and there is a premier, but and then there's a court. So I think there are 3 branches, but I'm not sure exactly how the checks and balances work. But
that's a, I mean, if it's parliament, it's probably very similar to my home country of Trinidad and Tobago. So we have a parliament, we have a senate. The president doesn't actually have any power. The executive doesn't actually have any power. Kind of like the Queen in the UK. So technically, the law goes from the House of Commons to the House of Lords, and she has to kind of put royal assent. So she stamps it.
Right.
So we don't have an active executive like you guys have in your president. So it's probably something like that.
Right. Yeah. No. So, excuse me. Yeah. So they're not quite sure like how that's going to go, but interesting enough, the LGBT basic community,
Right.
some of the community leaders in Taiwan basically said, "Well, I mean, we respect the democratic process."
Okay, that's good.
They went with it, But yeah, it was just so weird when I heard about this. I was like, "Wait, what?" I mean, it kind of reminds me of. I mean, it's nowhere near this level of confusion or instability, but I even remembered as I was covering for Think Liberty, covering the news stories going on in Sri Lanka. I don't know if so Sri Lanka is having this constitutional crisis, so to speak, where they have a prime minister that was fired by the president, but then he would not step down, and then the president put in a new prime minister, which the parliament voted in the majority no confidence vote, basically to not allow him to take his seat. While the former prime minister was, I guess, remaining in the prime minister's house, like kind of like the equivalent of a White House. And as a result of this conflict, there were riots in the capital where like a government minister was actually, as a deposed government minister who was trying to leave the capital, had some bodyguards which were forced to open fire upon protesters.
Wow.
So reaching the point of anarchy almost. No, Taiwan doesn't have anything like that.
Yeah, you mean chaos.
Chaos.
Yeah, because
I'm sorry. Old thoughts, old mental habits here. We're anarchists.
So, I mean, okay, so obviously it's kind of following in the British tradition in a sense. Because we have a president and a prime minister in Trinidad and Tobago. So when the ruling party gets in, the leader of the party then becomes the prime minister, and that's really where all the power is, right, in the legislature. So that's in the parliament. That goes up to the Senate, which I think for us is also appointed. So we don't vote for our Senate, just like here, the House of Lords is not voted for. But the UK has the Queen. In Trinidad, we appoint a president, and the PM does that. So it's probably something similar to that. But that's, oh man. So what is the big issue? Is it over the gay marriage thing? Is that what's causing the contention?
Yeah, I mean, it's the fact that first the court said, "Oh, it's okay," so people celebrated over that, but then they came back around and the people demanded a referendum because they don't think that the court has the right to just say whether it's okay or not without the people being okay with it. Which is why it became that. Personally, government shouldn't be involved in marriage, which is a tough one. It's a weird sell to LGBT people that I've known. When I tell them, like, they sit there and they cheer all day about gay marriage, and I say, well, yeah, I get it, but government just shouldn't be involved in the first place. So the freedom should be there, but not because government gives you the freedom, but because government doesn't mess with that, period. It's not the government's business. So that's a tough sell for some LGBT because they think, because most of them are still very much in the statist mindset that the government gives you the right or the legality to do things.
Right.
So
I think, didn't the state of Kentucky pass some kind of legislation basically saying, you no longer need a license? I mean, this is how it used to be, right? So, your little couple or whatever on a farm somewhere, you all get married. You don't need a permit. You don't need a marriage license. You don't need you didn't need anything. The priest marries you, or you do your own kind of common law thing. And you just kind of notify the state, like, okay, we're married. and they didn't bother with anything. They
Yeah, see, I mean, in a world where you would still have somewhat of a state, yeah, if you just tell them you're married and they just have to honor it, that's one thing. But for them to be involved in the process of like giving you a license to get married, the paperwork, the money, the all that, the the incentive. I mean, most states have a good incentive for marriage. If you get like I think it's so many sessions of counseling, you get a discount on your marriage license. So it's to incentivize people to put a little effort into making sure the marriage is good. But a lot of the marriage license laws and such are not heavily enforced. So It doesn't really make much sense either way. It's just like and we've talked about this, I mean, just from our ministry background, we believed marriage to be kind of a sacrament and it just shouldn't really matter so much to the government.
Correct. Correct.
So it's just, when I talk, like I keep saying, when I tell that to LGBT people, they kind of go, what? I'm like, yeah, go get married, do what you want. But government shouldn't have to give you the okay on that. You should just be able to do that on your own.
Exactly.
So, yeah, but I mean, if, to respect, and this is tough, to respect the state's democratic process for people to vote against it,
mm-hmm.
you'd have to honor it. Now, I'm not.
Y'all are in the same position we are with Brexit, right? The people spoke, and now it's up to the legislature and everybody else to figure it out.
Yeah, and if the people voted on it and they don't want it, then that's that. Yeah, that's as far. I mean, I personally, like I said, I don't really care. People can do what they want.
Right. So what are your views on gay marriage before we get, stoned with, I don't know, pink torches and...
It's people just do what they want. I mean, I personally wouldn't do it.
Right. And well, you're not gay, so I would suspect you wouldn't get a gay marriage. or is this your coming out party, Amos?
Oh God, shut up. No. I mean, we've come a ways. I mean, even when we were in our sort of moving away from religion kind of place, our phase, if you want to say, people asked us, like, so I'm licensed in the state of Minnesota to perform a wedding, and people, we talked about, like, okay, would I perform a gay wedding? And I said, yeah, and I still would. I honestly don't know enough about, I mean, to look at it from a social standpoint, I haven't seen any problems, which we're going to kind of we're going to get into some social issues today, by the way, for the listeners. But in terms of gay marriage, I never really seen any social issues with that. For men to get married, for women to get married. The only issue I ever had with the LGBT community is the whole sort of, however many genders there are, how there's like, multiple genders, and then if you touch on to like the pedophilia and the bestiality part, you kind of go, okay, hold on, slow down.
That was like NAMBLA. I don't know if you would remember NAMBLA, National Association.
I was actually just watching a Count Dankula video talking about pedophilia, how it's like having a sudden rise and it's being discussed again in social media for some reason. And
South Park did a good episode about NAMBLA. And it's very... Anyway, we wouldn't get into that. But you're right, because we've kind of gone away from, I guess, more traditional rules, gender rules, definitions, and stuff like that. And this is what we're dealing with now, right? So gay marriage, trans rights, and all these different types of things. Now, even though this is still a minority of the population that is dealing with this stuff, it's kind of dominating our everyday well, at least our social media. I can't say everybody's conversation is talking about trans rights.
Right.
So yeah, it's definitely become an interesting thing. I mean, my only issue with the whole movement is, look, you do what you want to do, right? But there seems to be a slant in like the LGBTQ ABCDEFG community that wants to smash traditional values, right? So if it is I as a heterosexual male want to marry a heterosexual female and pop out 2.3 kids or whatever the statistic is, there's almost like an antagonistic to that. Like they're angry at that for some reason. And these are the same, like a lot of these people, these are the ones that hunt out that one Christian baker in one state to not bake a cake with a particular thing on it. That's antagonistic, right? And those are my only issues with that thing, that activism.
What if like a bachelorette who's about to get married wants to get her penis cake done by an old conservative Christian man that just doesn't want to bake a penis cake?
Correct. And she's not gay. She's a heterosexual woman. She just doesn't want, the guy just doesn't.
But you don't see any bachelorettes bitching about that.
No. Or ending those kinds of things up in the Supreme Court.
Exactly.
So that kind of radical activism is what I have an issue with.
Right.
Now they're teaching, gender fluidity to toddlers and kindergarten kids and stuff. I have an issue with that. If I had kids, I don't want my kids learning that kind of sexuality from the school and from the state in general. That's my job as a parent if I was doing that.
Right. I had a discussion with someone where they were talking about like state sex education, and they asked me like, well, what do you think should be taught? And I said, well, yeah, if you taught anything, talk the basics of here's how it's done. You can here's how you can do it safe. Here's what happens if you don't do it safe. And guess what? There are other people that do things differently. I mean, I'm making it super basic here because people, like, when I had this discussion with some people, they thought I was saying, like some sort of like traditional Christian values regarding sex ed. I said, no. You lay it out straight, like how it is.
Correct.
And you point out that there's LGBT, there's different things people do, but you're not doing it in a way where it's like, you're not presenting it one way or another, not necessarily as, you're showing like, here's how babies are made.
Right.
And it feels good from then it feels good for people, but there are people that don't always engage in that way and they do it differently, but you're not necessarily
love each other.
Yeah. Who do things in different ways. So because my contention was with people with schools that are making it sound like that are basically, showing you all these other things, almost essentially normalizing this minority. And kids are obviously mentally very malleable, very susceptible to suggestion. So when when statistically speaking, LGBT is deviant. And that's such a dirty, that's such a nasty word people hear. Deviant. No. Statistically, it's a minority. It's a minority.
You can't have a huge minority.
No, sorry, I know. Huge. It is a minority. Yeah, it is. What is it? LGBT accounts for less than 4 or 5% of the population.
Yeah, something like that.
Maybe less. And you're kind of talking about it like this is just normal. It's normal among them, but the rest of the population still follows the general gender definitions, biology, and so on. So the school is definitely to share. I mean, it's like, well, it's kind of like the in political ideologies. The majority of people are Democrats or Republicans, so you teach that in school.
Right.
But you're not hearing schools talking about how you're not hearing schools spend. Yeah, I mean, yeah, we'd love to have libertarian ideology being shared, but I mean, if a state is to follow the the majority and maybe touch on the minorities in small bits, you're not going to hear about the I don't know, the flying spaghetti monster party. You're not going to spend a whole
spaghetti monster party. I don't know.
If we can think of it, it's a party. I mean,
sure.
There's like 400 registered political parties in the U.S.
Sure.
You're not gonna spend a whole month on every single one of them learning about them, their history, and all that. You're gonna learn about what's typically thought of. So
yeah, I would agree. You major on majors, don't major on minors, as the expression used to go.
Yeah, and that's kind of what's going on. And when it comes to this sort of gender thing, is you hear this. I mean, it's the state that is sanctioning, hey, we're going to teach you about the main things, but then we're going to spend even more time on the things that 1% of the population does.
Well, the bulk of education these days is pretty much useless. So I'm not surprised that they're picking up more stuff, majoring on things that are, not the norm, not within the fines of like everyday life, and majoring on that. Like, I mean, once upon a time, people graduated high school and they could get a job, right? That's not a norm anymore, right?
I mean, I got a job out of high school. What are you talking about? I mean,
they used to have skills. They used to do carpentry, mechanics, and all these other types of things.
Yeah, I mean, and it's anyways.
It's the dumbing down. It's the dumbing down.
Yeah,
and yeah, we're reaping the consequences of all that. And I mean, to your point about gays and stuff like that, marrying, you're absolutely right. We don't have enough data to know if this is good, because let's be honest, right? Heterosexual couples are not all peaches and cream, right? There are abusive families, there are dysfunctional families, which is why the divorce rate is as high as it is.
Yeah, I mean,
religious and non-religious.
It wouldn't be so far of a stretch to say that I bet there's abuse in lesbian and gay men relationships. Oh my gosh, really?
Oh yeah, it's
humans capable of bad things in relationships.
I mean, I just saw a study on this where actually lesbian couples are more abusive than like heterosexual couples. Like, women in lesbian relationships tend to be more abusive than women in heterosexual relationships. Nobody's talking about that. And I mean, it might be too soon to really kind of draw any conclusions from that, but that was what this study was saying. It's an interesting discussion. I mean, I'm not taking sides one way or another. I'm just saying what it is.
Wow. I didn't know that.
Yeah, it's pretty crazy.
But we're going to get into another social issue today, actually.
It's kind of along those lines.
Yeah. But it's something that has actually been observed over time, that it has a lot more to back it, but people start talking about. You guys have probably seen the title, The Fatherless Society. And basically, I mean, because Brook and I have talked about this through, like, last week, we talked on kind of red pill, for those of you who were listening, what that all entails. And one of the things that the red pill tends to address, but also it's not just red pill, but also in political, I mean, conservatives have talked about it. Libertarians have definitely talked about it. But it's just not become a mainstream thing, I don't think, at least, because of just the climate we're in. The society we're in is unfortunately favoring sort of equity for equity's sake. And I mean, just even our court system and our welfare system tends to favor, mothers. And not that there's anything like, objectively, there's nothing wrong with that. It's just the ramifications of favoring one over the other has made huge problems that are both created by just sort of social customs have been shifted, but also the government has sort of enabled this too.
Correct.
But basically, I mean, I mean, the fact that the government is involved in social engineering and no one has really criticized it on sort of a huge stage, it's talked about, but you're never hearing about it on a stage where it's part of the conversation. I mean, what would you say is part of the conversation regarding social issues, Brooke?
Well, in terms of I guess in the West and so forth, it's dominated by these minority issues as we discussed before. But yeah, definitely society tends to be very gynocentric, which is, female oriented. And that's, for supposedly this, as to steal the line from Jordan Peterson, the tyrannical, patriarchal, oppressive society that's run by men, we seem to really cherish women in this society, right?
Yeah, I mean, what was it, that video where they were like, they questioned him about the patriarchy, and he goes, "Oh, so like how, what was it? 97% of men, 97% of workplace deaths are men.
Yes.
Most people who die in wars are men.
Yeah. Most people who are homeless are men.
Most victims of violent crime, men.
Yeah. Most people who drop out of high school are men.
Women are graduating high school and college, and with better grades than men. Women are doing better in school. Women are starting to do better in just the places they work. Yeah. So if this is a patriarchy, where is it? Because the president is a man.
Right, and I think that was actually Jordan Peterson's argument, is like, you're going to pinpoint like these few minute exceptional men and try to impose that upon everybody. So you say, oh well, all these business owners, Google, Facebook, Apple and stuff, these are all the billionaires, control the money, they're all men, the president is a man, all this other stuff. Yeah, well, most of us are not billionaires, most of us are not the president, right?
Yeah, I mean, yeah, what is it? Yeah, if the most successful people in this country are men, okay, so you see that, but then you realize, oh wait, but also the least successful people in this country are also men.
Correct, which is the bell curve, right? The bell curve for men and women in terms of human potential, not just, in terms of strength, physique, intelligence, and all of these other facets, earning potential and stuff like that. Both of them are a bell curve. Yes, there are more men at the top of that in terms of physical strength, intellect, and stuff like that. But they're also on the other end of the spectrum, which is the low end of the spectrum, the low end of human potential. And a lot of men fall through the cracks. A lot of men, as we said, the system just doesn't work for them, and all these other things. So yes, they do have women that are at the top, but because it's a bell curve, there are fewer, and there just happens to be more men at that point. So to point to one half and basically say, yeah, this is the standard, all men are billionaires and presidents and all this other nonsense, and the poor women just can't live, because
the women, oh jeez,
the women are, they're having trouble because life is so difficult and stuff, and it's garbage.
So yeah, this comes into things with the welfare state. You hear about these stories, and the media is very touchy on covering this because they almost will never touch on this, is the fact that you'll have these mothers who have 6 kids, single moms, and it's actually more profitable for them to stay on welfare than to get a job.
Correct.
And I mean, obviously that's the more extreme examples, but as a general thing, you're seeing single motherhood or single parenthood in general is on the rise for all races.
Correct. I think I don't know the exact numbers of it, but for like at present, I think in the Black community, in the African American community in the US, the single motherhood rate is over 70%.
Yeah.
Right.
I think for white people, it's pretty darn close to that too.
I don't think it's as high as that. I think,
but it's still high.
It's high. I think it's like almost a third or a quarter or something like that. But, and this is the thing. Oh, everybody's blaming the white people in America for the oppression and slavery, which is 100 years ago, and all that other stuff. So I simply ask, so are you telling me that the destruction of the Black family is because back in the 1950s and 60s, it was not this high when there was Jim Crow and all these other things.
Wasn't there something about how fatherlessness was actually at a way lower rate during slavery? There's some statistic I heard about that.
Yeah. There was more. And it was illegal for most slaves to get married, and they still had fathers and mothers. In fact, I think in the African community at one point, the single parent ratio was below the whites. Like there were more whites that were single parents than the blacks, the Africans. But something has shifted. So the point I was making on this is like, are you trying to tell me that since the 1950s and 1960s, when there was definitely very evident racial prejudice and other things, the blacks had a much lower, divorce rate than today? Are you telling me that today there's more racism than the 1950s and 60s that would cause the demise of the African family?
Obviously not.
Obviously not. And
so there's another factor. I mean, it's like we were saying here, there is social engineering taking place.
Correct. And I mean, for the conspiracy people out there, yes, I'm, the whole thing with the CIA bringing crack cocaine into the black community. Okay, you want to use that as an excuse, that's fine. I'm not convinced of it, but at the same time, you still have to smoke the crack. You still have to make the choice to do the drugs. And I understand the thing. There was also a prejudice with the unions. Like their unions were very racist back in the 70s. They wanted to hire their own, and they discriminated against black workers. Yeah. So, but that does not account. That does not account for the drastic skewing of single parenthood in the black community today.
Yeah, I want to make sure everyone knows it is across the board. It's not just, only blacks have seen a rise in single parenthood. It's been happening. Everyone has been seeing it. And that's the thing. I mean, you're seeing it is incentivized through welfare. And then as a result, it has been praised even as, under the guise of empowerment, strong, independent woman. I don't need no man.
Yeah.
Well, your kid does, because it raises his chance of becoming a more productive member of society, success, graduating high school. What is it? I mean, there's all these statistics that say, a child born who is raised without a father has a lower chance of graduating high school, lower chance of, let alone, graduating college, lower chance of, just being productive. I mean, higher children born without fathers, raised without fathers have a higher chance of committing crimes.
Yeah. I mean,
we even talked about the mass shootings. You correct. See you're starting to see a highly correlated, it's highly correlated between children without fathers, or even just with a nuclear family, even just the most basic form. Not just, we're not saying, mom, dad, dog, nice house, just mom and dad in general. Growing up with mom and dad, that plays such a huge role in raising children who don't commit crime, don't do things, they don't become criminals. They graduate school, they become successful. What is it? Well, yeah, they've looked at mass shooters.
Yeah.
And a lot of them were fatherless.
Yeah. I think the prison population is like 80%, raised by their mom. Most people who are substance abuse users, so that's drug users, I think 70% of them are single mother raised. Before we go into all the statistics, though, I mean, there is another facet. So yes, the state is definitely incentivized single motherhood, but they've also attacked it on another front, which is the marriage laws. Right, so divorce law, and this is a very touchy subject and stuff like that. Since the passing of no fault divorce in the U.S., basically people can divorce for whatever reason, and I believe the last statistic we checked early on was between 60 and 70% of all divorces were initiated by women. And with that, we've seen the rise of basically marriage rape, where the man loses all the assets and stuff like that. And so the mother can now leave the husband. And because the courts favor the mother, they tend to award her all the benefits. So again, it's the state, because of the imbalance in the legal structure, is now favoring women and giving them a perverse incentive to get divorced and raise kids as single moms and stuff like that, and basically take the resources from the husband. Doesn't happen all the time.
Yeah.
But that's definitely contributing to the epidemic.
Majority of the time. And I mean, then you get things like the idea of a prenup becomes almost taboo.
Right. I don't know how it is in the US. I know over here in the UK, prenups are taken into consideration in the courts, so they really don't mean anything.
No, I'm saying is, but I mean, I'm saying socially speaking, if you're dating a girl and things are getting serious and you drop the word prenup in there.
Yeah, that's a good test for anybody who's in a relationship. Early on, you bring up prenup and you see their reaction.
Yeah, I mean, and it's not to go, I mean, this is not on any personal level. People might think, when you bring up a prenup, it's like, oh, you don't trust me? No, it's not I don't trust you, but things can happen. It's like, why do we get car insurance? It's not like we don't trust ourselves to drive safe. Stuff happens.
Exactly.
People behave differently. I mean, I think, Brooke, you were telling me, if you just look at, what was it? You go to these courts to watch, divorce proceedings, and how people who claim they love each other to the ends of the earth, till death do us part, the whole everything, because of something happening and the divorce happens, it changes who you are. I mean, not everyone is going to experience this, obviously. Not everyone is going to have they married a rich guy and they're going to divorce and just get $1 million and get out of there.
Correct.
But you understand that any substantial incentive in a divorce is going to change how people behave. This is how they deal with each other. Yeah. I mean, libertarians talk about this all the time, with how how removing government incentives can change how society will go. So you have, which is in a sense social engineering, but instead of having the state sanction it, you have people do it on their own. Allow people to form their own incentives. But now, because we incentivize this, it is a problem. You have, even if I'm like, 50 years old, or even if I'm like, 45 to 50, which is an interesting age group, you're having this rise in divorces for middle-aged men, which is also leading to a rise in suicide in middle-aged men. Yes. Where you have these men that have probably so they're at a point where they have a decent amount of money. Maybe they're not millionaires, but let's say they have a couple $100,000 in a retirement account or something. Mm-hmm. They've paid off their house for the most part, probably completely paid off by this point, depending on when they bought their house. So they're kind of like, 2/3, 3/4 of the way there to like being set for retirement.
Yeah.
Kids have obviously grown up, gone to college, they're gone, moved out. And so, and then unfortunately, in a lot of cases, people stay married for their kids.
Yeah.
And once the kids are not there, they all of a sudden they either have to rekindle that passion that they had when they got married, or divorce happens. So the divorce happens. She finds out, and it's not just she, and women in general find out. There's the incentive to get half of the assets,
or more. Yeah.
Because they might argue the case that because she's been out of the workforce, there needs to be some compensation for that loss of time, because he's had a whole career to build up. So, and this is just one of many cases. This is obviously, I'm not saying this happens every single time, but it happens too many times.
Agreed.
And so then he gets, So she stays in the house. He's kicked out. 2/3, 3/4, whatever. And a decent amount of his retirement savings go to her, and he has no retirement. He has to live somewhere else you have to rent a place. So now it changes his whole living situation. You never know if he even, how that's going to affect his job, because obviously stress.
Correct. Correct.
And in a lot of cases, well, a rising number of cases, men kill themselves over this.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, what you missed out on that is, okay, so the wife, she turns all evil. And again, this is kind of incentivized by the legislation. I mean, once upon a time, divorce in the US took up like 3 pages in any law book. Now it's a goddamn specialty, like elective that you do at university, right? Because it's so complicated, especially when there are kids involved.
You have lawyers that are just divorce lawyers.
They're just specifically divorce lawyers, and that has created this monstrosity. So that alone tells you how lucrative as well as how creative it is. So again, it is the perverse incentive. The lawyers, the more money they could extract, or the longer they keep the fight going, the more money they make. So the minute they know that there's money to be had, they're like, okay, mortgage the house, do this, do that. I mean, not always, but in a lot of cases, that's what goes on. But yeah, bringing it back to, if a lot of the suicide cases is people fighting for the men fighting to see their kids. And one of the right. Yeah. It's that. I mean, the most crushing, heartbreaking stories are men who've given it all. Like, they may have had some decent wealth or business or whatever, and they've given everything fighting the courts just to be able to see their kids and spend time with their kids. And they run out of money. The courts say they can't do anything. And many times it ends with these people taking their lives. And again, these are the perverse incentives that are built in, because of, I guess, the government, the legal lobby has got the state kind of backing this whole thing.
Yeah. And but, this all ties into, we're going off into, divorce court, divorce law, family court, and all this stuff. But all this ties into the incentives that play into marriage.
Correct.
You now have a state you have you've created a whole system around something that the state feels is their business.
Correct.
And they have to allow you to get married, to sign off you get married, you have to pay them so you can get married, to then dissolve the marriage by going through how they see it should be done.
Correct.
To then allow men and women to weaponize the court towards each other.
Correct.
When I think, what would you say would be like the most libertarian way to go about marriage?
I would definitely say that they should not be involved in marriage. I can't remember what state it is. I think the state has actually passed the legislation. So basically, you get married however you want to whomever you want, and you just kind of write in and notify them, okay, this is my significant other.
Like private marriage or something, right?
Something like that. I mean, it's recognized by the state nonetheless. And I think the same thing should be done. So like Norway, for instance, I have a friend out there. He got divorced, and it was no big court fight or anything like that. They went, I'm not even sure if they went to court. I think they did it through arbitration through some lawyer. They kind of came up with an agreement, and the divorce certificate was sent to him in the mail, sort of thing, right? It does not have to be this antagonistic. Yeah, that's the guy. Amos is just sending me a private message, so I'm just kind of affirming. Yeah, he knows who I'm talking about.
It's a friend that we both know this person. So
yeah. No, I mean, it's not always. I mean, I'm not saying that Scandinavia has it all figured out, but I think they've kind of taken a different approach. Like, for instance, in Hungary right now, there is a pro-family initiative that's taking place, encouraging families to get married, to have kids, they get tax breaks, they get all these different types of things. And yeah, so I mean, everybody's complaining about Europe's population decline. That's garbage. Just look at places like Poland and Hungary, and you see that's not the case. It comes down to government policy to really stimulate these types of things.
Which, yeah, I mean, one way or another, I mean, they shouldn't be involved in that period.
I agree. I mean, if you're going to do it, you got to do it evenly.
Yeah.
Give everybody who has kids get whatever credit or tax discount or what. You got to do it across the board.
So how would people get married in Ancapistan, Brook?
Am I allowed to say this? Yeah. So they fuck.
And then they sign a contract.
And then they sign a contract.
And the government
consent. I think that causes consent.
Yeah. And then the government has nothing to do with it.
I mean, seriously, like, someone gets a marriage certificate. What do you use that for? You don't use that to tell people. You go and you tell people, yeah, this is my wife, this is my husband. When you go to a school, you don't have to present your marriage certificate, right? Be like, yeah, he's the dad, this is the mom, this is our child. For everyday interactions, we just point it out. This is my girlfriend, this is my wife, whatever the case is. The only time you need it is because when you have to deal with the state, right?
Yeah,
so that's it. They created the marriage certificate for themselves. So if you want to get a divorce or you filing your taxes and all this other kind of nonsense, it's for them. So the state created an issue to give themselves a reason to exist.
Yeah. So, yeah, this all ties into this fatherlessness issues. Yeah. I mean, men will not. It removes the incentive. It changes you are manipulating the incentives regarding sticking with a woman. I mean, you had, and it's not that I necessarily, endorse any of this, but I mean, you would have shotgun weddings. You would just have situations where the social customs we would have would demand people to follow through, get married, take care of the child. Like, that was just the man thing to do. It was a different social contract, so to speak. Now that you've completely changed the family courts, the marriage laws, and now you have this stigma against the idea of a prenup to remedy that. Even among the most maybe traditional gender role kind of women, the word prenup just in general just sounds, bad to people, because it comes across to people to sounding like insurance against your crazy ass.
Yeah.
It's what it sounds like. I mean, there was someone I knew. They were they were looking to change career fields, and they wanted to get into the insurance business. And I thought, well, what's in the insurance business? He said, well, there's a new kind of insurance that might be coming about called marriage insurance.
Fantastic.
And I said,
brilliant.
I said, what? Well, what's that for? He says, well, excuse me, for all the lawyer fees, court fees, and everything that goes into a divorce, which can get expensive, you have a marriage insurance plan to cover that.
I think that's brilliant. I think that's absolutely brilliant.
And I said, well, how would people get that? He goes, obviously, they need to be mature enough to have the conversation to say, we're getting this. And if we're not getting this, we're not getting married, kind of thing.
I think that is, and again, because the insurance companies don't necessarily want to pay out on this, they might actually give incentives and might lobby the state to give incentives to encourage marriage. Right. So that's actually kind of using the free market
encourage marriages to stay together.
Correct. So I mean that might be actually a free market solution, is to offer marriage insurance, right?
Yeah.
That's actually quite brilliant.
But yeah, it messes with, I mean, yeah, that we're in a society now where fatherlessness is incentivized, where not only is it incentivized for the mother, but it's also negative. It's a negative incentive for the man. He doesn't want to get married.
I mean, that's what's giving rise to the MGTOW movement. And I mean, even just in general, if you look at the social message that's coming out from men, it's on TV, it's every sitcom, you know, it's the woman is the superwoman holding the family together, and the father's a bumbling idiot, he doesn't know what's going on. You know, it's this continuous social programming against masculinity, against men, against traditional gender roles. You know, they're trying to you know, I don't know who they are, but society at large seems to be, well, I can't even say it's the majority, but people are lashing out against this very loudly. And we're seeing the fallout from that. Like, I mean, you were just quoting some of the statistics. Now, the suicides amongst the men is definitely horrific.
3 times as likely to commit suicide as men in general.
Yeah. So divorced fathers and then single children raised of single parents. The statistics are definitely an anomaly. They stand out. So there's something to this. And then you were going through it as well, like youth suicide, fatherless homes, the mass shootings. I mean, guns have been in the U.S. for over 250 years.
But real quick,
yeah,
and I like how Larry Sharpe. So the thing we were touching on was the fact that, you know, libertarians, you know, whether or not they talk about this so much. I mean, you hear some talking about it, but in general, this is not part of a mainstream conversation. You're not seeing it on Fox News. I mean, you'll hear like Tucker Carlson will talk about it,
yeah,
but you're not seeing Hannity. You're not seeing all these, you know, big shows on Fox News. Limbaugh. You're not hearing. It's only on the fringes. You're not hearing CNN touch on. I mean, CNN is more concerned with Orange Man bad than. You know, then no dad bad.
Right.
So it's a problem that needs to be addressed. But what I liked about Larry Sharpe, what he had said about it, I talked about mass shootings, which he was touching on a point that never really heard too many like libertarian candidates talk about, is mass shootings are basically public suicides.
In many ways, yes.
In many ways, it is. It is to make a statement to show that, you know, it's to make a statement, send a message. You know, it's people think it's all about the guns and whatnot. No, it's the message of what they're doing. It's beyond the gun issue because, like you said, we've had guns forever.
Yeah,
but we've never had this specific problem. Violent crime is at an all-time low.
Yeah.
But mass shootings are rising for some reason.
Correct.
Fewer people dying, more incidents of lots of people dying. It's kind of a weird thing. But yeah, you have fatherless, guys. Most mass shooters are boys, aren't they?
Yeah, most males, yeah.
Males, yeah.
Men and women.
But majority.
Sorry, men and boys, that's what I meant to say.
Right. In schools, boys. In these situations like colleges and whatnot, boys.
Sure.
And it's such a mess. And you only really started seeing it recent, like what was it? Columbine was like 90 something, 99?
Yeah. I'm not exactly sure when it was, but I think that like the first mass shooting was recorded, at least since they started keeping statistics, in like 1982, and it was one that year. And I think So to where it is now, I think there are like 16. Well, maybe not this year, but in the last few years. So like for every decade since the 1980s, it's just been growing exponentially.
Right. Yeah, and I mean, I kind of like how like South Park is touching on it in a very they're not leaning one side or another. I don't know if you've been seeing so South Park, what they've been doing is like the first like few episodes for this season,
right?
Like, there was a mass shooting in the school every episode.
Really?
Yeah, in the background there was a shooting. At first they like brought light to it, like kind of pointing out the fact that Americans aren't addressing the problem, but they weren't coming at it from a gun violence issue. It was just mass shooting issue.
Right.
And then every episode after that, the kids would just be in class, and outside, you just hear gunfire.
Oh no.
The SWAT team would show up and then they just leave for school like nothing's going on.
I haven't watched the new season, so I'll definitely have to check that out.
So it's an interesting way of going about it. I mean,
sure.
Yeah, so they've talked about that. They're touching on other issues too, but yeah, the shooting thing is definitely. I appreciate the fact that they're not saying it's a gun thing. It's just pointing out the fact that it's happening so much, and no one is really addressing what's going on.
Correct. I mean, the point I was going to make about the gun thing. Guns have been in America forever. Well, at least for the last 250 years. The AR-15 is like what 50 years old, 60 years old.
Right.
So I mean, it's not even to say, oh well, since the AR-15 has come about. No, it's a very old thing, and most mass shootings actually don't involve semi-automatic weapons. They're usually handguns. That tends to be the biggest thing.
Handguns are semi-automatic.
Well, right. It's not an AR-15. It's a pistol.
Not rifles. It's mainly handguns.
Mainly handguns is what I meant to say. Yeah, because anything is a semi-automatic if you got to pull the trigger. So,
except for a revolver.
No, that's still semi-automatic because it loads the chamber.
That?
Yeah.
I've heard. Yeah.
Pulling the trigger, it's semi-automatic. Automatic is you hold it down and it rapid.
Oh, okay. I'm mixed up now because I've heard.
Maybe I'm wrong.
Semi-automatic. Yeah. No, you're right. Maybe there's something else with it dealing with a clip, or something.
Yeah. I think the AR-15 puts out like 3 bullets on like a hold down, so it doesn't go rapid fire. It does 3 and it stops, and then it does like another 3 and it stops.
Huh.
Yeah.
Shows how much we know about guns.
But yeah, the point I was making about that is that there have been guns in the U.S. forever, right? And this is a new phenomenon that we see rising. So it's not the guns. I think we could distinctively, even in our own conversations, we know that. Vermont, for instance, massive gun ownership, probably one of the most armed states in the U.S., lowest in terms of violent crime, like just, really, really low. And there are a lot of factors to that. But then you look at a place like Chicago, where some of the strictest gun laws, and they have ridiculous gun crime in the city of Chicago. And I know they try to blame everything on Illinois, and they say, well, not Chicago. What's next? What's next to Chicago, Illinois? What's the state next to Illinois? Is it
no,
Wisconsin? No. I can't remember. But I mean, a lot of them try to say, well, people go across state lines to buy guns in other states.
Yeah.
Impossible. It doesn't work that way.
It can, but it's not like the incentives just people aren't driven to do that easily. Like people will get guns if people want to get guns.
Yeah.
It doesn't matter about the states around it. You're creating an environment that is shifting the balance of it sounds kind of bad. You're shifting the balance of power.
Right.
Who has the power to own a gun? Well, if you take away from everyone, the people who really, really want it, we've talked about this with free speech. Once you start to censor free speech, only extreme speech, radical speech tends to stick around. When you start to create things like hate speech laws, only the most radical speech will be heard.
Right.
Because you'll silence all the in-betweens.
I'm not sure about if that would necessarily translate to your current gun ownership situation, because you have to do a background check to own a gun. Right. So you cannot say
it. You just get it off the street. What I'm getting at,
this was the point I was going to make. Right. Of course, the illegal gun trade is unregulated, but the people in Chicago are trying to blame the state next door. They say people are going to the other state to buy guns legally, but that's not how it works, because you have to do an FBI background check. Right. That was the point I was making. But then there's the flip side to that people who do live in Chicago with very strict gun laws, a lot of regular everyday citizens own guns to protect themselves, right? So a lot of people are pointing to a place like Chicago and be like, look how many guns are here. That's why there's so much violence, when it's no. a lot of those guns there are actually for self-defense because they happen to live in a very violent neighborhood. One does not, cause the other. One is actually,
right.
It's the reverse. The violent crime and the violent shooting has caused people to buy more guns to protect themselves. But anyway, that's a whole other issue. I was getting back to the mass shooting issue. These are the realities. We've seen them in the U.S. To try and tout more gun control, that obviously hasn't worked in Chicago or even parts of California and other places where they've had that. And this is the conversation that isn't being had about the fatherlessness, the lack of connection. This issue has been going on probably since about the 1950s, pretty much when manufacturing became the major industry. Men left the farms and they went out to work.
Right.
And that's when men started to, or at least children, lost like a lot of that connection with their fathers. And even more recently, with all the incentives and stuff like that, even more fathers are absent from the home. And as we've seen, the statistics are bearing it out that, these kids don't necessarily go on to do college. Many of them drop out of high school. Drug addiction, abuse, these cycles just continue to go on.
Yeah.
But at the same time, society is still firing shots at men, for want of a better phrase, saying it's all men's fault, evil men, evil masculinity, and all this other kinds of stuff. Well, we've tried that. We've tried lack of male influence in the lives of these young men, and it hasn't worked.
It actually creates even bigger problem, because now you have your school system, which is more driven to, biologically more suited for girls.
Correct.
Obviously. So what was it? The book Why Gender Matters talks about the studies they did in primates, how male primates tend to, and it reflects upon obviously human males, about how males tend to favor and more what they called rough and tumble play. They talked about how just the behaviors that are most beneficial and how we naturally behave in relation to primates. Now you have schools where you have almost little to no recess. You have limited physical education, gym.
Yes.
You have a culture. You have a culture within schools that is favoring more, basically less physicality and more mental. And you're not really addressing the obviously growing boys' need for physical activity, for hands-on aspects. You have your shop classes and engineering courses that are hands-on, but they're not really incentivized for kids to get involved in. So you're having this further and further internalizing of masculine energy from getting out and expressing itself. And it's not
Correct.
to say, boys need to, do all this stuff, get in fights all day long, but the violence becomes the only channel when all you can do is sit in class all day, not you're not letting off any steam.
Yeah, the education system is treating boys like defective girls, and that I think is a huge mistake.
I think I've heard some schools are trying to do like, so for kids who maybe like are in detention, instead of just making them sit there, they're trying to incorporate like some small scale projects, like giving kids like mindfulness training, basically meditation and yoga and all this stuff. And I can see that to a point, but then it's, again, you're still treating them like they're girls in a way.
Yeah. So as you say, like the rough and tumble play, and so even a boy who might be fidgeting, maybe he's not every boy is interested in sitting and reading a book or, just learning in a classroom kind of thing. And there used to be so many more activities that boys could get involved in terms of like shop class. They probably did archery. They did, sports. Some places did like mechanics, and they teach them how to like do an engine, fix an engine, change the oil, kind of stuff. All of that's gone. It's all cerebral now. It's all about passing the grades and getting into college and stuff. And this is the role of a father, right? Now, full disclosure, me and my dad didn't have the greatest of relationships, especially because he divorced my mom when I was about 12. So I am basically what we're talking about, right?
Right.
Fortunately, I haven't done anything crazy, right? I've had very good influence in my life, and I'm working through a lot of what are clearly drawbacks for not having a father. But this is the role of a dad, as a friend of mine put it. We were out at a play park one day, and this little kid, he wants to jump on one of these kind of riding toys. It looked like a motorcycle, and you could kind of rock back and forth on it on a spring and whatever. So he runs up to his mom and is like, "Mom, I want to jump on the motorcycle." So the mom goes, grabs him, picks him up, and puts him on the motorcycle. And he does that for a little while, then he jumps off and he goes on the swings and stuff. And then a couple of minutes come back, Mom, I want to jump on the motorcycle. So he goes and mom picks him up, puts him on the motorcycle and stuff like that. Anyway, so that goes on for a little bit, and then the mother walks off and the father is there, and the kid runs looking for the mom, doesn't see the mom, finds the dad. I was like, "Dad, I want to get on the motorcycle." And the dad is like, "Well, get on it."
Right.
And the dad goes and he basically teaches the boy how to mount the motorcycle, right? You put your foot down, put your weight on one side, and kick your leg up and stuff like that. The role of the father is to push those boundaries into the child and to teach the child to push back against the limits. The mother can't. Yeah, it's to challenge him, right? And to teach him which rules to break and which rules not to break. The limiting beliefs, you can challenge that. Going against the state, maybe not so much, right? Right, unless you
later
on. Unless you fancy prison, but yeah, that is the role of the father. Now, I could tell you, as being raised by my mom, and I love my mom. Mom did a great job. She didn't have this kind of insight, and she had a lot of other mental, personal issues and stuff like that. But a lot of that push, I could see lacking in my own life. And when I was younger, I had more zeal and stuff like that. I definitely pushed, but it never became a consistent habit. And that has been a downfall for me. And this is what's going on. So a lot of these kids are looking at society, looking at life, and they're not seeing very many prospects. People are not going to hand these stuff to them. Things are not going to come easy. You got to work for it. You got to push. You got to push yourself. You got to be okay with uncomfortable situations to accomplish some kind of goal. And most kids without a father have never experienced that. Right. Even when they did feel that kind of discomfort, the mother would come and soothe the child, and they never got the kick in the ass they needed to push through it to get better.
Right.
And this is we're looking at the generation of men raised by women, and it's been like this for the last 30 or 40 years.
And we're starting to see the ramifications of such actions. Basically, you're seeing
correct
problems.
Yeah. I don't think anybody would look at this society and say that we don't have problems. Now, the libertarian philosophy is great. Freedom is great. But this is where we come back to the idea of you need a culture, a unifying culture, to really keep any kind of social fabric going, right? And we discuss this all the time, like the open borders, people. As I say, if you had open borders and half of China, which is like 500 million people, moved into the United States, you will have communism, within a generation, right? Because their culture and that collectivist thinking will change the society. So in the same way, yes, the libertarian philosophy is great, and it's not a moral philosophy. That's fine. But without traditional values like having a family, encouraging fathers to be fathers and all these other types of things to push back against these state incentives, we will see this decay get even worse.
Yeah. And it's not to what I see is generally you don't see this discussion among libertarians. I think the implication that we should perform some form of social engineering is why. I mean, that's just my theory.
It's anathema to a lot of these guys.
Yeah, we start talking about social fabric and stuff, and they're like, "Oh, like it's not political in nature. It's not a political thing. It's culture." And yeah, it's a big part why no one really is talking about it. It's we're also consumed with the politics of things that we don't touch on the social ramifications of our politics, of our policies. You know, we want open borders, we want free tuition, we want to
healthcare for all.
Healthcare for all, UBI, or even just on the right too. We want democracy in the rest of the world by force,
right? Nation building.
Yeah, we want nation building. We want bloated national defense budgets. We want to borrow more money. I mean, that's both sides too.
I don't think there's a government in the world that doesn't want to borrow more money.
Yeah, so you have all these problems.
But closer to home, a lot of the issues that we're dealing with are never going to be solved by politics. It's going to be social.
I mean, social and culture, society and culture are upstream from politics. Politics is downstream from those.
Correct.
You know, your culture determines your society, which then kind of branches out into your politics. And you don't go upstream to deal with those things, and those things don't need sort of legal push. It's just a movement of people seeing what needs to be done, of making changes. I mean, our guest Eric that we had a couple weeks ago talking about anarchism, how it's just, you form your community of people to behave and live a certain way. People see that. They see that it is given, it helps you. You're happier. You're doing better. And people join you. In the same way, just leading by example to not just on the libertarian side of promoting free markets, promoting liberty, promoting individual freedoms, but also on the side of, some people who I think should be more conservative in their values, promoting healthy relationships, raising boys and girls in more masculine for boys, more feminine for girls. Obviously there's, I'm not like pushing back to like more archaic gender roles of, the woman who's barefoot in an apron in the kitchen.
What's wrong with that?
There's nothing wrong with that.
Maybe that's, just that's how they get off.
Not that there's anything wrong with that, but
yeah, as long as it's voluntary.
Yes. Voluntarism is sexy. But that you promote that through living your own life, but also to kind of live it out yourself. Yeah. So
I mean, I agree. But you need a certain amount of I guess for the man, you need a certain amount of masculinity to push back against these perverse incentives that are out there, that are constantly barraging men as evil, constantly speaking down to men and stuff. You need a certain backbone to be able to take the criticism. And this is my concern, of course, is because we are seeing a generation of men raised by women coming through the system. They're more susceptible to these types of things, like the Marxist, the ideology, and all this other kinds of stuff, because they've never been taught to push back. They've never been taught.
Right. Okay. No, I get what you're saying there. You're that's what's giving rise to essentially a movement towards promoting and building masculinity again. You have
correct. Oh, even feminism, because Lauren Southern attributes her, I guess, conservative slant to her dad. Right, her dad was the one who taught her to question things and kind of think things through and stuff like that. But yes, go ahead.
But yeah, you have like we've talked about a lot here and there, the red pill community, basically men trying to reclaim the masculinity they feel they were never taught or instilled in them from their fathers. You hear a lot of these thinkers and just speakers within the red pill community that are basically being called like the fathers they never had.
Correct.
So you're having men that have basically, you hear we talk about this, and then some women will come at you and go, who hurt you? And it's like, well, the system, but a woman, and it's not just necessarily go against women. It's just the system, the incentives that are in place have made the system in a way that there's a little bit of adversarial tensions now between men and women.
Correct.
It's kind of steaming and kind of just stewing over there for men, and rampant radical feminism is kind of coming out as well.
I mean, I completely agree, and I think there's a real emergence, especially in the manosphere and stuff like that, about reclaiming masculinity. I mean, one of the first books when I got out here, and I made the decision, okay, I'm gonna work on myself and stuff like that, was Jack Donovan's book, The Ways of Men, because I had a very simple question, like, what does it mean to be a man? And I mean, it's a very poignant question. Like, how am I supposed to reach my potential if I don't know what that is? And I mean, anybody of our listeners out there who's maybe questioning some of these things themselves, maybe you're in a very similar situation, I'd recommend Jack Donovan's book, The Ways of Men. And he basically summed it up, if I remember. The traits of a man are some kind of excellence, so some kind of skill that they have. They were useful to the tribe in a sense. They were a good hunter or whatever. So you have some kind of competence, you had strength, and you had honor amongst men. So those were the three traits that kind of defined masculinity. And he kind of, I mean, those were the tribals thing, and then he tried to impose it in the modern sense, how that looks. And in this day and age, we're falling short in a lot of those things, right? We don't necessarily have the esteem of our male friends. We don't necessarily have, strength. I mean, everybody's soy now, and I keep saying, don't be strong, don't be soy. The whole strength thing.
You have what is it? So you said competence,
strength, and honor.
So you're lacking in competence because the education system is fucked.
It's horse shit. Yes,
you're lacking in strength because traditional. I mean, not only do you have the obesity problem. Well, yeah, you have the obesity problem, but there's also not much of a physical activity. That's not being promoted among men. And then what was the last one? Honor. Male feminists.
Yeah.
I mean, male feminists are coming out as, I guess, becoming not honorable, I guess. I don't know. You're having a division among men.
Yeah.
More so too. There's the incels, there's the MGTOWs, but also there's the male feminists, the soy boy types, and it's men hating themselves, men hating each other,
correct,
but also men themselves behaving poorly as well.
Correct. And what I greatly appreciate about the manosphere, the men like Jack Donovan, Rollo Tomasi, our friend, Richard Cooper, and other things. I mean, these guys are tapping into something that is so necessary, and it's under attack. There's no doubt. Like, even, I mean, people might not know him as Roosh. He's kind of like a PUA and stuff like that, but he's really trying to reclaim masculinity and stuff like that. These guys, because of technology and stuff like that, we've been able to connect and really, get in touch with that aspect of being a man and reclaim it in a very positive way. No matter what you say, men have built pretty much society. Everything pretty much everything that you can see that's been built kind of comes from a man. Not to say that women haven't made very important contributions.
In the flip side of that, if women have any concern with that, just imagine this: all those men came because of a woman.
Right. Okay. So, I mean, yeah, we could play the genetic game, right? They wouldn't be here without women. Sure.
I'm just saying, if people are starting to think like we think men did everything, it's like, but they wouldn't be able to do those things if not a woman gave birth to them.
Right. That's it's a poignant point. But if the men were incompetent, they may not have contributed.
Well, yeah. There's that.
That's kind of the point I was making, right? And that, most of the Nobel Prize winners of men, and again, not that they're on female ones. Most of the research is done by men, not that they're on female ones and stuff like that. And my whole point with that is that the more we encourage positive, masculine excellence and these other things, the better society is as a whole. And it's not to say that they don't have scummy men out there, that they don't have some real reprobate, sick, twisted motherfuckers who, do all their kind of nonsense. But there are very, as I say, the bell curve, there are people on both ends, and we need more men to take up those roles of excellence.
Right. Awesome.
Yeah, I think we did good, man. Are we on time?
Good. We are good on time. So we are going to get out of here. Thank you everyone for joining. I guess anything else you wanted to add, Brooke? I think we've pretty much touched on a lot of it.
No, I think we've touched on it. Anybody who wants to hear more about this, you can always get in touch with us, because both Amos and myself are kind of going down this path of self-improvement and really tapping into that stuff. And we'll be happy to recommend some stuff. We might even do some streams delving a little more deeply into this stuff. So definitely look out for that.
Right. So, thank you everyone for joining us. This is actually episode 34. I just double checked it. I made the modification. So yes, this is episode 34. Thank you everyone for joining us once again. And I'm so used to doing this. I forgot to mention, just wanted to shout out to the Think Liberty Network, which we're a part of. We've been a part of a few episodes now. We've got a lot of changes coming forward. So we want to thank them once again for having us on, giving us the opportunity to reach more people, and produce the content we produce. But thank you everyone for joining us. We will be back again next week, Monday at 11 o'clock Central Time. That's the US. And thanks everyone.
Thanks for watching, guys.